was protected by rent control, except single-family homes, unless that home is owned by a corporation, and duplexes if the owner lives in the other side of the duplex, and it only protects units that are older than 15 years old. Okay, but that's a huge amount of the population. And so most of us have some sort of rent control protection. So figure that out, okay? And then let's start a chat about this on the COVID-19 tenants' rights hashtag on every fridge Facebook page, since I think most people have Facebook, and ask questions about it, not about your own particular case, but do it as an example. Because if you're asking questions about your own particular case, I can't really answer them in a public forum, but you can say, what if somebody lives in a duplex and the landlord and the other side is empty, but the landlord is trying to move in there? Then I can answer that question as a general question, so that people can get educated about what laws protect them.
Mm-hmm. And this is a question from one of the viewers here. If the federal government approved mortgage forgiveness, can our landlords take advantage of this if we continue to pay rent? Like, we want to make sure we are protected if our landlord is foreclosed.
Okay, so don't worry about foreclosures because it doesn't really matter. Whatever protection you have as a tenant, you have whether or not your landlord is foreclosed. Whoever buys in the foreclosure sale steps right into the shoes of the landlord, so it doesn't affect you at all. Neither does the sale of a property. What rights you have. It doesn't matter whether ownership changes. And in fact, to some extent, if a landlord is foreclosed, it causes so much delay because the banks are not all that organized about how they handle these things, that tenants in foreclosure situations actually end up in a much better situation because it causes a lot of delay, which allows us to get delay helps tenants. Delay means that you get to stay in your place, and so don't worry about your landlord being foreclosed. But that brings up, what did the federal government do? A lot of people think that there's a federal moratorium on evictions, and there is not. What the federal government did is it put out a whole bunch of money. That money will go to people individually if they have been paying into the system. So that leaves out undocumented workers, for instance. But otherwise, people will get money. And it also gave money to the states, which will then go down to the cities to do all kinds of other programs. There's a potential for for mortgage and loan forgiveness with that money, but there is no eviction moratorium. If you live in public housing, or if your owner has a federally insured loan, there is some additional eviction protections for tenants. But it's very hard to figure out if that applies to you unless you live in public or subsidized housing. If you want to know more about it, we have a link on that same report, that same status of eviction protections and tenant right protections for tenants in LA County. There's a link to the federal law. There's a link to a cheat sheet put up by the National Housing Law Project. And there's a link to a website that theoretically helps you figure out if your owner has a federally insured loan. But I'm getting a lot of complaints that the link is not very good. And so, to rely on the local and state protections, and then, if the landlord is stupid enough to file an eviction and not settle it, when we do the answer, we'll figure out whether you also had that federal protection.
Mm-hmm. So do all these eviction, quote-unquote, protections that are going on in LA right now, do they include also affordable housing?
Yes. So what do you mean by affordable housing? So let's define that. I don't know if in my generation we say Xerox machine when we really mean a copier, and that's because Xerox was the first copy machine. So often people say affordable housing as a sort of a generic term to describe housing that is subsidized in some way by the government. And the government subsidizes housing in a lot of different ways. So we have public housing, which what a lot of people call the projects. We call public housing communities. There is government subsidized housing where loans are given to private developers to build housing. There's subsidized housing that is owned by nonprofits. And we all often call all of that affordable housing. And yes, all of the restrictions that I've talked about apply to those the kinds of housing. Plus, that's probably the kind of housing that's going to have that protection, additional protection from the CARES Act.
Okay. And another comment from a viewer. I thought the single-family residences owned by a landlord were covered under LA County's just cause eviction protections.
No, I do not believe single-family residences are covered by the county ordinance. If you want to put that question on the discussion, I will read the ordinance again. Single-family residences are like the sacred cow of the housing world. Do people remember Proposition 10? Proposition 10, we tried to pass it last November. 60% of the population are tenants. We should have won that hands down. What happened? People like Antonio Villaraigosa, former friend of mine, and all kinds of other people got bought out by the landlords, and they started doing commercials saying, oh my God, the single family owner who worked so hard is going to lose their home. It was bullshit lies. But even tenants fell for it and didn't vote for a law that would have protected them. So single-family homes are very, very hard to get protection from. And so in the Tenant Protection Act, the state law, we were able to get protection for single-family homes owned by corporations. Why? Because Wall Street has been buying up the single-family home stock. And so there are huge organizations like Invitation Homes that own a huge number of single-family homes. So those tenants are protected, but single-family homes owned by anybody that is not a corporation, not protected. And I will find out the county, but question, honestly, right now, I used to say, being a housing lawyer is not rocket science except for the federal programs. But now being a housing lawyer is rocket science because there are so many laws that we have to keep in our heads because we have all of these local ordinances that have cropped up since 2016. So I want someone to ask me, why have so many local laws cropped up since 2016? Because when you back tenants up against a wall and start charging them unreasonable rent, they will rise up and fight for laws. And so in the 1970s, when I was just getting out of high school, we had a housing crisis. And in that housing crisis, we got rent control in Los Angeles, West Hollywood, Santa Monica, and Beverly Hills, interestingly. But then we kind of and also some cities up north. Then we rested on our laurels as tenants, as a movement, for many, many years. In 2016, rent started skyrocketing, and suddenly people were paying $1,300 for a roach-infested single in Pico Union, and so tenants started rising up. And organizations like the LA Tenants Union formed, and organizations started fighting for stronger and stronger laws. And we got rent control in a whole bunch more cities. Locally, we added unincorporated county, Inglewood, Culver City, just cause protections for Glendale, and I am missing one. So, these are not gifts from our electeds. They're not gifts from our benevolent landlords. These are hot-fought battles at the local level by tenants who are involved in their tenants union or in the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment or in Tenants Together and any number of other organizations. And on our advice sheet, the best advice I can give to anyone who's listening is get involved, because we are not going to get stronger laws if you don't get involved.